Welcome to Spirit Baby Radio. You are about to join a frequency that will open your mind, expand your heart, and activate your spirit. Thank you for joining Kelly Meehan, Spirit Baby Medium and Master Energy Therapist. Kelly believes in the power of the Spirit Baby. She speaks with babies in spirit before life, in the womb, and after life. She supports, teaches, and guides others to tune into the intuitive and mystical parts of life for greater wisdom. Join her in meeting your soul baby and build your connection and relationship with deep love and trust. Welcome to Spirit Baby Radio with your host, Spirit Baby Medium, Kelly.
Welcome to episode 110, April 9th, 2021. Your grief is your poetic muse that needs expression, creative energy, awareness, and most of all, love. How do you fully allow grief to guide you? Is grief dangerous or damaging? Are you open to be with how loss wants to hold you? What supportive healing rituals and ceremonies honor your experiences of loss? I have a special guest episode, and as always, I'd like to introduce Joanne Zerdy, and I'm going to read her bio in just a moment. Hey.
Hi.
I was like, well, there we go. Hi. And we're both just talking a little bit before we jump in. Is the spring weather we're both experiencing? A little bit of cold, a little bit of sunshine, and getting ready for spring break energy. Be out in nature, and I love that. And how we met, I almost feel like I started to go into this with everybody. We met through another person that was on my podcast within this unique, special, loving, pure area of grief, and we just kind of connected and talked, and I was like, oh, I got to have her on my podcast. This is going to be a beautiful conversation. I feel like it's going to be very grounding and healing too, especially for those that have experienced birth loss, but more than anything, any kind of loss, really. We're all kind of an apprenticeship with grief, as Francis Weller would say, who everybody knows. I love Francis Weller's work of The Wild Edge of Sorrow, his book around really the apprenticeship with grief, with life. And so here she is, and let me read more. Joanne Zerdy, PhD, is a grief worker, educator, and grieving mother in Asheville, North Carolina. She brings her embodied experience of losing her first child, Finley, during childbirth to her work as a teacher and writer about grief. Joanne facilitates creative grief projects, including a grief pen pal network, online grief mapping course, and grief workshops through Inviting Abundance. She teaches prenatal loss trainings on the behalf of the Institute for the Study of Birth, Breath, and Death, and homegrown families. Her writing on grief has appeared in Modern Law, Still Standing magazine, Mindfulness and Grief, and the Institute for the Study of Birth, Breath, and Death. Birth, Breath, and Death. She thinks a lot about life, death, grief, and love as she parents Finley's younger brothers, Phelan and Ren. Did I say Phelan right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, Phelan.
Okay, I love those names. It's like magical little fairy gnome children. Thank you for being here. No, thank you.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much for inviting me and for our initial conversation we had and for saying, yes, let's keep talking.
Yeah, I always have this grief conversation, how important it is. And I want to hear, I know you've shared your story probably so many times in so many ways, but yet again, my community wants to hear what led you on this journey of all this beautiful kind of grief work that you're bringing to others. I know maybe sharing a little bit about Finley and his energy with us in this space now. Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you for asking. Thank you all for listening in into the conversation. So I was pregnant with my first child, healthy pregnancy. I was 34 maybe, and I was at the time teaching at the university, or Illinois State University in Central Illinois. My PhD is in theater history, and so I was teaching literature classes. And we had just moved to Illinois, and I became pregnant, and it was, we were really looking forward to becoming parents. We had done the Bradley birth training, 12 weeks. We had done research. We had, had a doula and a midwife, hospital nearby. I mean, just kind of like all the checks in terms of preparing for that first arrival. And I went into labor spontaneously on my due date, labored at home, went to the hospital, intermittent fetal heart monitoring. And as I was just about 9 centimeters dilated and getting ready to push. My midwife checked for a heartbeat. She had checked about 30 minutes before, and there was none. And she couldn't believe what was going on. I mean, she herself was actually 9 months pregnant with her 4th child, and I think she was also kind of in shock of like, what? Everything was going fine. She called in an obstetrician to verify with an ultrasound, and there was just such shock and silence in the room that was really palpable. I mean, I was, in intense labor, and but I just remember that moment. And, the lights had been dark and everything kind of got a bit brighter, and our son had died. And I remember that my midwife touching my knee, and that was the signal for me that he had died. That was kind of her physical contact that I realized the severity of what had happened. And I couldn't keep laboring, so I, at that point, kind of looked at my husband with kind of deer in the headlights eyes, and just said, I basically need a cesarean. So I had my surgery, and, exhausted. I labored about 22 hours, and then they asked if I wanted to have the baby right away, and I just felt like I needed to prepare myself to meet him. So I asked if we could wait a little while, and they said, of course, let's wait as long as you want. You can have him as long as you want. And so we kind of went to the recovery room and tried to grapple with what was happening, and, we just called our mothers and asked them to share the news. And then we met Finley, and he came into our room, and he was 6.5 pounds and perfect. And, it was a moment of exquisite beauty and love and agony and shock and trauma. And so we had a couple of hours with him, and then coroner came in and kind of asked if, kind of insisted really that they have an autopsy. And we, not really knowing better, not really knowing we could have said no, we reluctantly agreed. And then just, really just kind of began processing the devastation, as of course I'm also post-surgery, and, my immediate thoughts are like, how do I stop my milk from coming in? What do I, just these things that for months I had been, of course, preparing to invite all of these processes to happen. And now I was like, let's put the brakes on all of this. And in the hospital, I just remember having this clear realization that my life as a university professor, my life teaching theater, that was just done. And it just felt like the book had closed, and there was going to be something else on the other side of it, but I couldn't know what that was at the time. We had Finley cremated, so we were able to see him again. My mother was able to fly in to meet her grandson. And, just really at that moment, my husband Will and I really opened up to grief. We really said, we're going to step into this experience. We're going to read, we're going to write, we're going to talk to people, travel, just as to try to understand ourselves as now grieving parents. All of a sudden we started to occupy this new identity. And so we were fortunate. It was June, and we had several weeks where we didn't have to do anything except be with each other and sob and heal and, process. And so that really was the impetus for moving into grief work. And the more that we read, and the more that we really kind of tuned into our own intuitive sense of what we individually needed to heal, we really felt like making something was really important. We had no child to tend physically, and so we needed to put that energy. So Will wrote an essay, I started a garden, and that really became the kernel for the work that we do now, which is really encouraging people to think about what can you do in this time of grief? What practice can you develop? What can you draw from in your own interests, hobbies, experiences, and make, what can you make? And, fast forward a couple of years down the line, we moved from Illinois to North Carolina. I was pregnant with my son Phelan, And we really just continued to let grief wash over us. Whenever it kind of knocked on the door, we opened it, said, okay, here we go again, whether it was welcoming in, Finley's younger brother and learning how to parent a newborn, even though we felt like we should have already had that experience. So it was new ways of grief. And then slowly starting this business together of Inviting Abundance, where we bring together grief work and healing processes and our background as educators and really try to think through, what can grief look like and what education needs to happen around grief, and how can we support healing practices, for individuals.
So, it's incredible to just hear your story, and I know others that really connect with their own experience. And the questions I have, I'm so curious about. You said something, and to me, I was like, oh, there was so much energy in that. Is after birth, the shock and trauma, and that coping, that whatever that's happening, is that how your energy was asking for something creative, like the doing, like there was something that, you're not like nursing or caring or, it's like, but this, I haven't really heard it in that way. And so it sounds like you both, what kind of healing does that bring, do you feel? It's like moving into these projects, as you said, you were doing gardening, and then your husband was doing writing, it sounded like you said, right?
Yeah, I mean, it felt like we had prepared ourselves mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually for having this new person in our lives. And because we both are educators, my husband also has a PhD in theater. When I was pregnant, it was like, oh, I can't wait to teach this baby about X, Y, and Z, like these are squirrels, this is an oak tree. I mean, just kind of simple things that we, do with kids as we introduce them to the physical world in which they exist. And in the hospital, I realized, I kept thinking that I was going to be teaching Finley, but this whole time he's been teaching me, and I'm the student. And I felt like between the self-care that pregnancy requires, the new processes that are happening, thinking ahead to parenting, I mean, just so many things that were like subtle lessons that I think that I was starting to learn. And part of that was finding practices that really spoke to me and that I felt drawn to in pregnancy, and continuing that, after he was gone and I was his mother, but without him being here. So it was the first time that I planted a lot of like vegetables from seeds. And so it was natural that I then moved into more of a kind of, formal relationship with our garden, and ended up we called it Finley's Garden, and we got a sign made for the garden. And we started reading memoirs of loss, particularly, stillbirth experiences, infant death. But then we really were drawn to other kinds of writing about death and grief and loss. And we're like, what's out there? People have been, since there have been people who've been dealing with death and loss. And so what are different perspectives, and how can we kind of bring them together and like curate our own individual like learning and healing journey with this information?
I almost feel like to me, your energy, it's like the guru of creative grief processing, like what that essence that you bring, I think is huge. Like, I mean, we're talking about baby loss in your own experience, but like you're saying, it's so encompassing of all people, because we go through grief, whether it's the death of people or death of many different experiences. And I love this creative energy around it. But I also had a question. I wanted to kind of shift back a little bit back into Finley. How old is he now in light body? When's his birthday?
So his birthday is coming up June 5th. He would be 7.
Okay.
So, which is interesting, just thinking of the significance of kind of 7. And, we found, I mean, of course, each year is incredibly challenging. The weeks leading up to his birthday is like, clearly, the embodied dimension of grief and love and parenting is kind of like heightened. But the 5-year mark seemed really profound for us. And now the 7-year mark also feels like a kind of a shift or something, a stage or.
Wow.
I
wonder
exactly
about that. Let's talk about that. I'm really curious because I run it's called the Love Circle and Healing Circle every month, and I have this circle that's been going on for 2 years now, and there's someone who just left. Her child, she was going on 13 years with her son, and one person's like 2, and some people are a few months or a year, and it's interesting to look at the timelines of our earth world and that connection we have with those that are lost, and how each year it's quite, I don't know, it's like I almost can't articulate it. It's like it brings something, but it's nothing you would think of or imagine, right? It's just like, this is what's here. And I have to speak, and I wanted to dedicate this episode. I don't dedicate my episodes really, but it's April. It's my birthday month. And this is the month my mother passed away. So I want to dedicate this particular episode to Mama Love there. And so I'm coming up to the 4 year, and it's so transformational compared to 3. But I'm like, wow, I couldn't have imagined it, or like I said, articulate it. I still don't know what's coming because my mother, I feel like she has 2 death days, because 4 years ago she died on Easter. And Easter is different every year. And so even though she died I want to say the 16th, 17th, my mind's a little wandered now. That means but she died on Easter, but it was a different day. And so I do hold that she has 2 death days, one being Easter and one being the actual number day. And it feels very different this time. And at the same time, I'm like, I'm going to sit with it and see what comes. I'm not going to jump ahead, right? It's like, I'm just going to see what wants to come from this time. And I do want to honor that was her birth into another reality and experience who she is, and not pretend it doesn't exist, or I should say not pretend, but maybe some people have so much pain. It's hard to show up for that. I hear that from people losing children, and it's like, you don't have to show up any way you want to show up, but you also want to show up without feeling like whatever, judgment or fear or pain that we put ourselves on, right? The year piece, you say about the 5-year was a big energy for you. 7, can you just talk about that a little bit more? Maybe your own, I don't know. I'm like, maybe, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess as you were talking about your own experience, I kept thinking about the shape of grief. What is the shape of grief this year? Sometimes it feels like overwhelming, like a dark cloud that just you can't see past it. Sometimes it's like a quiet, sad voice. Sometimes for me it's like a burst of creative energy that something needs to happen. I need to do something. So that was the first kind of thought I had, that when we marked Finley's 5th birthday, I was pregnant with our son Ren, who was diagnosed with a congenital heart condition during pregnancy. And Finley's birthday was the beginning of June. He was diagnosed at 20 weeks gestation at the end of June. So that month of June was a really intense time for us. So I don't know, maybe there was something, I was sensing something, with him inside of me. The fact that Finley's heart stopped for no reason, there was never a medical diagnosis for what happened. But that kind of suddenness of his departure, and then finding out that the baby I was carrying, his little brother, had a heart condition that we were going to be then, dealing with for the rest of our lives. Maybe there was something in, I don't know, but I definitely felt this kind of heavier, more worrisome feeling at that 5-year mark. And then it was also thinking about, will he be going to kindergarten this fall? That's, those kinds of milestones that we have, that a lot of parents and caregivers mark with little ones. So I think that was going there, potentially, that was, and then this year, I don't know, 7 years. I mean, I think about kind of the magic of 7, the mystical nature of the number 7, and that the idea that we, if I'm remembering this correctly, every 7 years our body has regenerated its cells, so we kind of move into these different life stages. So there's something about, I don't know, I'm interested in exploring something about my connection with Finley as we've gone through this, 7-year period together in this non-tangible relationship as parent-child, as mother-son. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about now. And the other thought I had as you were talking was, I think a lot of times that as we anticipate an anniversary, it could be, a death day, it could be someone's birthday, an anniversary, some significant event, it could be a holiday. Your case, I think, is really fascinating, that Easter moves around, but that it also marks in these two ways your mother's death. I think we can bring a lot of sorrowful energy and worrisome and kind of, what is that day going to be? And sometimes we find, and I've talked to a lot of grieving parents over the last few years, that sometimes the actual day doesn't feel as heavy as the lead up. We have all this anticipation, and sometimes it can unfold and be a quiet day, or sometimes for people that we've met, they do acts of charity, or they do meaningful rituals for their child, and they actually, they feel the love and the gratitude more than they feel the suffering and the trauma and the loss. So, of course, that's not for everyone, and, people have such a wide range of experience, but that's the other thing about thinking about time, thinking about anticipation. We find for Finley's birthday, we always need to have kind of like a loose plan for the day, knowing that we could at any point say, nope, like this isn't working.
Yeah.
I just want to lie in bed, or, I just need to cry for an hour or whatever. But for us, spending time in nature is something we've done every year to mark his birthday. And we bake a cake every year, an apple cake, because when he was in the womb, we called him Little Apple. So, we have these rituals that we do every year.
Thank you for sharing about the rituals, because I know that this is a big deal to honor and create some, but just how beautiful you just even shared that it's like you just kind of, the anticipation is a big deal. And then when that day arrives, we just had this discussion in a group last month where there were some really big birthdays coming up of loss and older, toddler, and one was twins. And it's like, what am I doing to celebrate and honor? And I mean, not celebration is the right word, but honor and just be. And it's like, either creating a tradition or just showing up going, okay, yeah, I don't know where I'm going to be. Let me just kind of see. I'd love to hear more about that, because I do feel like I have a lot. And maybe, maybe there's more resources. I think Kelly, she sent me some resources, like more of honoring stuff. Maybe there's things that come to your mind. But I love that you shared about the apple cake, your little apple, and how, it just, these different things that we do to really just be in our heart space with this connection, and how our culture, I don't know how kind our culture is about that. If they're like, what I've seen, it's like not okay. What is your thought about that, even?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess I'll touch on that first. I mean, we live in a death averse, I'm saying this as a white woman living in the United States, in a death and grief averse society. I mean, we're encouraged to either medicate ourselves through it or move past it somehow, or distract ourselves or buy things, right? Like that's kind of the modes that, sadly, that most people are, I think, encouraged either actively by others telling them these things, or just that's the kind of messages we're receiving, through social media, popular culture, et cetera. So yes, I think that, that's a great question about like how kind, or are we living in a time of kindness around this? So I definitely don't think that, people having and whatever is to them, the appropriate time and space to process, to remember, to, honor their children, or loved ones, but of course, mostly thinking about little like children that have been lost. So yes, I think collectively, those of us who are grievers, kind of need to advocate for ourselves, which can be really difficult because it's exhausting and it's tiring and stressful. But I think anytime we see an opportunity to kind of educate someone on the process, I will grieve for Finley for the rest of my days. There's never going to be a point where I'm going to get over the death of my son. It's not going to happen. So yeah, I think whenever we can kind of resist and encourage others to take the time they need and to process and to not feel pressure is super important. And I taught a perinatal loss training to doulas a few weeks ago, and in my opinion, no matter how long ago the loss or how long someone carried a baby or how long they lived, through post being born, it counts, So if someone had an early miscarriage 20 years ago, that counts. That's part of what that person is carrying as they move in their life. So I think that's really important. And I think anytime we can advocate for ourselves and one another, those of us who are grieving, I think that we collectively move the conversation forward and move healing forward. So I think that's really important. And then about rituals, I think that, first of all, I think it's important to think about rituals in lots of different ways. I think sometimes people think of ritual as like a major religious event, like you've mentioned Easter, right? Like an Easter Mass or like some kind of religious holiday. That can feel overwhelming to people. Like, I have to create a ritual for my child, or I create a ritual for, the experience I had losing a baby in pregnancy. Like, that feels overwhelming, or that feels daunting. So I love to introduce the term micro-ritual, which comes from Joanne Cacciatore's book. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She has a lovely book called Bearing the Unbearable, and she had a stillborn daughter.
I have that book. I was like, why does that name sound familiar?
Great.
Sorry, I have that book. Yeah, I haven't fully read it, though.
Yeah.
It's pretty, it's really,
it's lovely.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
So she started she started the Muse Foundation. She does a lot of work, advocating on behalf of bereaved parents and doing trainings, et cetera. And whenever I do my pregnancy loss trainings, I introduce this concept of micro ritual, because I think it's first of all, more of like a secular idea. I mean, of course, it can be applied in lots of different ways, but it's basically how we incorporate our loved ones who have passed in our day-to-day life. And so for someone, it might be lighting a candle every day. For someone, it might be just talking out loud to their child. For someone, it might be if they have a photograph, just looking at it, touching at it, having kind of everyday interaction. And so I really like this idea of ritual, because this, for a lot of people, I think feels more doable. And I think it's a way that we can practice our grief. It doesn't, in a way, perhaps then when these anniversaries come around again, these birthdays, death days, maybe they don't feel quite so onerous and worrisome, because like the person has been practicing their grief throughout the year, if that makes sense. And so I think in terms of this, I encourage the people that I work with, whether they themselves are grievers or they support grieving families, I kind of say, well, what is meaningful to you? For some people, it might be, a walk in the woods. For some people, it could be, making something by hand, whether that's cooking a meal or, knitting a sweater. And so kind of start of what do you do already in your day? And then how might you incorporate this relationship with your child or this grief that you have into that activity? So it's not like you're necessarily starting from scratch, but it's kind of bringing an intention and a focus about, again, your relationship or this process of grieving into something you're doing every day. And that, I think people start to go, oh, okay, that's interesting. Like, that seems perhaps a little more doable than, kind of starting with a big picture, like, what will you do to honor your child?
I know.
Kind of question.
You said something that just kind of in my mind, this woman actually I supported this week, something came up around grief, and it was around a miscarriage, but it was more of like, because, the work that I do, so I see the energy, and some people do hold different levels of grief. Some are not active, and I said, there's an activation of grief around you, but what you do with it, I noticed, because I could see that, and we confirmed it, and but I was like, here, and I gave her, like, I feel like this is where you're good at, is like giving a different perspective of grief, because her fear was, the grief's not there. I'm going to push it away, even though it wants to come up. But I said, it's not about you activating. You have to go find the grief, and then you feel like it's too much to bear. I said, the grief wants to come, and you're just going to recognize it. Be with it. See if it wants to move. It wants to yell. It wants to cry. It wants, give it something. And it was such an eye-opening moment for her, because like her and like many, maybe you've seen this, where they're like, grief is like all or none. I don't know. You know what I mean? It's like, it's like, there's this like idea, maybe that's just this idea, but I said, I was trying to really encourage her, and I could see that because she's gotten advice, whatever, from other people, but it was like, well, the advice is different when it's not really I like people to move into their emotional body and like really look and, what is this piece that wants to come up and be recognized? It's like the fear of like, oh, I have to activate it. I go, no, it's not you have to activate it. It's there. You're just ignoring it, and you're just creating more pain and issues and struggle with it. But it's like letting it, and I feel like there's something about, I know I love and adore, and I bring to people, and the word I use is love and adore, is the permission to have grief. Like, it's like, I'm wearing it. It's a part of me. Please don't take it away. It hurts. And it's incredibly painful, but I want to see what it wants to show me. Why do I have to keep suppressing it? Why does everybody around me tell me, try to make it go away, or that it has to be whatever it has to be? And it's like, you know what I mean? Like that piece of like.
Yeah, no, I hear that from a lot of people. I mean, this idea of permission, that needing permission, needing an okay to feel what they feel. I mean, I think grieving for a loved one, or grieving the end of, a significant life, a relationship, or, something that really kind of shaped your identity. I mean, there can be overwhelming feelings with that I think can be frightening. And I think when it comes up and there's like a surge, I mean, it can feel like you're out of control. It can feel like you're losing your mind. It can feel like you're never going to come back to reality. And I think, that makes sense. But people are like, ooh, I don't think I want to go there. That's overwhelming. And what if I can't find my way through to the other side of that? And I think that, again, getting back to the kind of societal limitations, like we're not, I don't think most people are equipped to really want to understand and embrace intense emotions. Like I'm thinking, are there discussions about this at school? Are there, where are like kids and young adults learning kind of how to be a human, and so, so I think there is legitimate fear with that. So I think finding someone who you can trust and either can be with you or you can process afterwards when you have this, people call it a grief burst or a grief surge or just this intense experience, because, like you say, it's there. I mean, the loss is there. We carry this forward. We don't ever start over one morning and say like, okay, it's a new life. And I've left behind all of the pain and suffering. I mean, we're just moving it forward. But how can we do so mindfully and compassionately towards ourselves? So I find one of the things that I do when I really start to feel intense emotions, I try to figure out where is it located in my body. And a lot of times, and still I would say my grief around Finley is in my throat. And I then think about my throat chakra and the throat as being this site where self-expression comes up, right? How we speak, for those of us who speak verbally, that this is where our voice is made with our vocal cords. But it's also a place that can get kind of like bottlenecked, right? I mean, literally the word neck is in it. So it's a place that can be really tight. And I find, I mean, every time when the grief comes up, like I feel it in my throat, I feel constriction, I feel tension. I put my hands on my throat. I think about opening. I think about breath. I think about healing energy. And then for me, Finley is so connected to my heart that I kind of like ask my heart to send some love to my throat, if that makes sense, and to help open and to help kind of shift. And so I think if people, whatever that practice is, maybe it's embodied awareness, maybe it's, kind of like allowing yourself to go out of control for a little bit. And, when you feel that surge of emotion and trusting that you'll be able to find your way back, that your brain, your rational thinking is wants to come back. So
because that's the thing, you share that's important is like the people, like that's the fear I feel like. It's like, I won't come back from it. Like it's so, I know in my earlier times of grief with and I told you the story with my brother and my mom, didn't really have much break to like not like to just find a balance between both their deaths so close that it was like it feels never ending, and it feels like the world is colorless and tasteless. That was my experience. Like food had no quality to it, and the emotional exhaustion was really big, and the just almost like I feel like I go into the body like the autonomic nervous system, like a lot of freeze response, probably just shock, wanting to disperse. And a lot of freeze, a lot of even zoning out or staring off, kind of like, maybe even just not be able to feel the pain that's in that experience in that body. And the relationship with the people was also a catalyst for that grief as well. It's like, what was that connection in earth life, which to me, mine wasn't very positive with both. So then that's a whole other, thing.
Right, dimension,
And so it's interesting how, using the body as, and of course I love that. It's like when it speaks, and I know it can be hard to like, I know when I've grieved, now when I reflect back, just hearing you say that, it's like, gosh, I don't know where my body was. I don't even know where my feet were. And, it's so, it's different now because it's like, I've done some, I decided to study death midwifery and jump deeper. Now I'm in this somatic, I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Like now these old pockets of energy, they get to be held in the most beautiful way when we get to move into our bodies and speak to ourselves with kindness. And, there's so much hate and judgment that we can really abusive energy we could put, like, I'm not doing it right, I'm not grieving right, whatever that is, or this is not, this is wrong, but that permission. And that's why I love the work you do. And I just want to share some of the things we were just talking about on your website: grief mapping, grief pen pal, grief podcast. What is the name of your podcast?
It's called To Grieve. And so it's really about the practice of to grieve, that verb to grieve. Like, what does that mean to grieve? And we have talked to, not everyone is a conversation with someone else, but mostly we look at interesting grief projects or people doing something around loss, grief, healing. This is really active, intentional work, grieving either themselves or supporting others. So that's really what we're interested in. Like, what are those creative dimensions, and creative in a really broad term? I mean, some of those people are artists and musicians, but some of them are, like there's a conversation with a rabbi, there's a conversation with a fellow grieving mother around herbs that I did. So it's not like you have to be an artist and be a sculptor and make grief sculptures. It's like, what do you make? Again, that question, what do you make in your time of grief?
And I feel like such a great podcast because we're going to repeat that later at the end, because I want people to connect with your podcast and see these different episodes. And like the episode I really enjoyed, and I talked to Joanne about this, was the herbs. It was I love herbal medicine, but I was like, I never thought, because it's so new to me still. I like holistic medicine, but I don't know the depth of earth medicine in that way. But just to hear, you guys were talking about like the bitterness and like what it tastes like. It was like really textural, and I like that. It was like, and what does it do? It's like calming the nervous system and like allowing you to be in a space, that you need. I really enjoyed that, and I just say that because I want others to like tune in to be able to listen to this conversation of grief and that creative process.
Yeah, and I just found, that was part of my own grief journey. I was drawn to herbal medicine in those months after Finley died. I was drawn to gardening.
Oh, wow.
I came to permaculture design, and I said we named the garden Finley's Garden. And then I did a 2-year herbal immersion online course, and I have an Etsy shop where I make herbal honeys and herbal tea blends and think specifically about grieving and healing. So that's been like part of my, over these last, 6.5, almost 7 years, that's very much part of my interest. And with my academic background as a researcher, I'm like, well, let me learn. Like, what do what do herbalists do? What is the history of plant medicine around grief? Again, like not reinventing the wheel. It's like people have been doing this for millennia. There have been so many practices. And for me, grounding to the earth just felt so powerful. It's like I'm connected to this planet and connected to all these people who have come before me who have grieved a child or who have, gone through suffering and trauma in some way. And so how can I tap into this energy? And plants just made such sense, like the wisdom of the planet, So that was really a lot of what led to that particular episode.
Where are you on Etsy? I just pulled it up. I'm curious now. Is there like a shop name?
Yeah, the shop name is Finley's Garden. So just no apostrophe, just FINLAYSGARDEN, Finley's Garden. And we have on our Inviting Abundance website, we have a page that talks about it as well and links to the Etsy page.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, because I was going, I typed it in. I got a lot of paper. I don't think I typed it in right. Oh, this is paper? Did I not write? I just feel like sometimes it's sensitive. That's why I tell people when they give names and stuff, it's good. We can get it back to your website because sometimes I'm not gifted in that. I'll get the exact spelling and I'm like, what? I get the weirdest stuff. Me and my husband always laugh about that. It's just like, what is this? I don't know.
But I want to.
Yeah,
and I think some websites
end, this is another area I feel like is really, No, you're good.
No, I was just going to say, I think some websites it's even hard to search in them. So that's why we were like, well, let's make on our Inviting Abundance page, describe it. And that way, if people are interested, they can find it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I was saying another piece I really wanted to talk about, which is it happens in my group and I get a lot of inquiries about is I'm pregnant, and because this has been your experience, I'm pregnant, but I now have this child that I lost. And how do I be in gratitude and grief at the same time? It's such a big area. Do you see that as a big area? I mean, from your own experience, I'm sure, but I hear this quite often, and I know it's like a day-to-day thing, right? But how do you navigate through that? How did you navigate through that?
Yeah, no, it is. It's a big thing. And this was, again, this perinatal loss training I just did for a number of doulas. We had a section on pregnancy after loss. Because it's like if you have clients, we know how prevalent pregnancy loss is. Like this is going to be something that you're going to come across. So how can you, be prepared so you can support them. I mean, there are a couple of really great organizations out there that have great resources for people. Pregnancy After Loss Support is one, and Return to Zero, RTZ, Hope is one. For me it was, Finley's death, becoming pregnant again, knowing immediately it was going to be another boy, and it was. And kind of thinking like, well, this almost feels like the harder route in a way. I mean, of course, it would have been difficult if it had been a girl too, but just feeling like, okay, this is Finley's brother. Okay, these two brothers, they would have been two brothers that I would have raised. So it was kind of processing that. I found that for me, pregnancy is not like even with Finley, it was not like, oh, pregnancy is like, I'm glowing all the time. I mean, I just, the embodied experience of it was challenging, so I allowed that to happen, and I allowed myself to not necessarily feel, I was happy to be pregnant again and hopeful, but I kind of let myself be more cautious. I didn't go to a prenatal yoga class because I didn't want to be around other pregnant women who maybe had their first pregnancy. Like I felt myself kind of my body marked in a way with Finley's loss that made me just want to be more protective and quiet. And, so I was mindful of that. And for me, it was also too a matter of, I really wanted to honor this pregnancy. I feel like Finley had his journey. He's on his journey, but he had his journey inside of me and then transitioned. Kind of that wasn't my schedule, but that was what he needed to do. And so with baby number 2, I said, please, I want you to stay, but I'll honor the journey that you're on. And I would kind of be like, please stay with me, and if you have to go, you have to go. But I really want you to stay. But if so it's kind of a back and forth. And I really just allowed everything to come up that needed to. I talked a lot. Will and I talk all the time about all of this, so I was constantly able to process aloud. I had started seeing a therapist after Finley died, and so for 2 years I saw her into this pregnancy until I moved out of state. But she's someone that I still stay connected to. And I guess I just I knew that grief was going to be part of the experience no matter what I did. Mm-hmm. So I welcome that as part of this, and I just tried to mitigate the fear as much as possible, knowing this wasn't, and then Will was constantly saying, like, this is another child, this is another pregnancy, we don't know what's going to happen. And then find resources. So when I moved to Asheville, the hospital had a program that we could go, having experienced loss, and come up with a, really careful birth plan and meet the nurses and tour the OR, which I did end up having a second unplanned cesarean. So I think that's the other thing. Like, what are the resources available? What are the supports available? What are the options that, someone has carrying a second child or a third child after loss? Being really gentle with yourself and knowing that it's okay if you really don't want to interact with a lot of people, if you don't. We didn't have a baby shower with Finley, but I definitely was not going to have a baby shower with Phelan. I just felt more cautious. But the other thing that I did was, in Finley's pregnancy, I started keeping a journal to him. I would just write in a journal about the pregnancy and kind of, what I was looking forward to in him coming. And then after he died, I wrote his birth story to him in the journal, and I just kept writing in it. And Will would write in it as well. And that's how we were kind of processing, another way of processing, being his parents. And so when Phelan came along in pregnancy, I started a journal to him too. So, and then we have one for Ren, and we still write in all of them. So I wanted to kind of document his pregnancy in case something did happen. So I think I took more photos and, wrote a lot to him. There's some of the things I did. Find specific supports, be gentle, allow kind of me to feel what I need to feel, and then talk to him. I would say, like, we weren't 100% sure of his name yet, but I basically was like, baby, your brother was here, and I think he left you some notes inside, and I hope you're reading them, and I hope you feel him. And and just wanting to welcome him and his energy, and he talks about Finley, his brother he never met. Finley is definitely a part of both of my living children's lives, and so that's really important to us.
Yeah, and I hear that with other bereaved mothers, like how the family connection and even the father's connection or the siblings, and how there's still, what's the incorporation of I call the light child. The light child, how they're still involved and connected and what that looks like. And it does take a very, I feel like, intuitive, expanded, unique kind of energy to be able to go into that trusting place, to go see, like, what's this about and how to build that connection. And I do know, I hear, a lot of, like I said, a lot of bereaved mothers, like, how do I, then be in one place or another? And you just shared it so beautifully. And I'm hoping that, or I know that those that are tuning in will find some kind of ground in that. Like, it's okay, this is where you are, and it's not going to be, it doesn't have to be whatever you think it is, because the experience before has, created a certain tone and energy to where you are. And as I can say, you just, even from your, your journaling and writing, and I know that they're all connected. I hear it. I hear siblings telling me. I know it as a fact. Like, I literally, and you'll be reading more of that when I write a book with some stories of people that have given me permission to share, where it literally was like, this one particular woman, her son, she was really, her grief was so intense. And I don't know, I'm sure it's intense for everybody, but it was so hard for her to find where she can exist in her body and connect with spirit. And she had nobody, like, there was no one to talk to about it. There was no one that was really encouraging that the spirit being, this light-bodied child, is still connected to you, and you get to build a conversation, whether you think it's imaginary or real. I know a lot of it is real. That's my view. And so, because I've heard the children say things to me where, for this particular woman, her son, he was great. We just always connect with him. And one day he said to me, my sister is coming. And I said, he said, his sister's coming. And she's like still freaking out, right? She's like, okay, And then, it was a really small timeline of me working with her. But then I was like, oh, wow, she's coming really soon. I was like, I don't know. I think that could be weeks. It could be a month or two. And then like in a month, she messaged me. She's like, oh my gosh, I'm pregnant. I'm freaking out. And then a month or two passed, and then she's like, it's a girl. I'm like, you're okay. You got this. Like, breathe through it. Connect, do your meditations, do your thing. And then her little girl's here, Earthside, and it was like it's just fascinating to be in a space to see her story unfold, and her anxieties and her fears were like tangible, it's like palpable, like they're so like they have structure to them, but it was like at the same time they're so illusionary, right? Because it can create like that clinical, like deeper anxiety or depression, and we did not want to go there. That was our purpose, not to go there. But it was like sitting on the edge of that is like, like almost like chewing on the nail, like, but it's like, it's okay. Pregnancy isn't flowery and beautiful for everybody. I've shared in some of my episodes that my pregnancy I called it the dark night of my soul, and I laugh a little because I have to. But I remember people looking at me like, you should be happy, or isn't this a miracle? And I was just so sick from nausea and just felt so out of my mind and out of my body. I was like, what are they? I feel ungrateful. They're making me feel bad and I feel worse now. It's like, it's like, I was like, how do I be grateful? And I had no support. Like I had no, parents, aunts. I had nobody like to like nurture the ancestor, the generation, to tell me I was okay and that this was normal. It was just like by myself in a room, literally staring at the calendar, crying, going, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. Like there was just nobody, And so then, which is probably why I do the work that I do too. I realized that we need something, whether it's the grieving of nobody and moving into this new space of mother, like rebirthing into,
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Dark.
I mean, community. Yeah, I think having community is so important, and that community can look like any number of things. And for us, like people who had written books, that was part of our community. It was turning to writers and thinkers who were writing about grief and processing. So it might be friends of yours that you've had. It might be a community of fellow, grieving people. It could be, other women who are experiencing pregnancy after loss. I mean, I think community can look like anything, and yes, but feeling safe and feeling supported, I think, are so crucial. And it makes sense why a lot of people are scared about letting the grief fully in, or nervous about continuing on in the journey. They don't feel safe and supported.
Yeah, the community piece is important. This is why I started the circles that I did. What I've realized, even in this year, I'm like, wow, we need more community groups, because some of these women in the bereavement community have never even shared their story to anybody. And they're just literally in pain. And so I'm like, wow. I'm like, we have stories. They have to be told, and we have to hold them. And what I mean by have to, but in my groups of women, we hold each other. It's, there's such heart-wrenching, such unique experiences, but it's like nobody's judging you. We actually love you right now. Like there's literally not an ounce of like shame. People have shame sometimes if it's like, especially with like a medical termination or I should have done something better, or it should have been this way. It's like, no, we're here to listen and to hold you, and let's hear your story. And that's a big deal. I mean, that is huge, right? And so community, it's like, especially community that can hold your energy. That's another piece. Yeah. Not community where they're like, oh, what's wrong with you? Let's put you out by the, by the garbage cans. You're not worth it. It's like community where it's like, it may be family, but it may not be. In my situation, it absolutely was not. And so I feel like there's a lot of pressure when people say, well, go to your family, but with your family and you don't have the same vibrational awareness. You'd still have community. Like you said, there's like people, there's friends, there's, new friends, old friends, and I set that up for my second pregnancy after my first one was so dark and so disconnected, even postpartum depression, all that stuff after. So the second time I called in, and wow, I mean, incredible. I had food lining up at my door. I had people, let me hold the baby, go pee. Like, oh, really? I was like, wow, okay. And it's like, no, it felt, and I was like, I am totally showing up to receive that, all this love from everybody, whether they want to come hold the baby and have me eat something, bring me food, just check in with me. It was like so night and day. It felt like I was loved, and I needed that. I needed that more than anything. And it showed up, and that community piece is so powerful in death and life, right? It's like, but, I know we live in, America, and so we're not taught that a lot. It just doesn't look like that. But it can be, I suppose, right? We could create that somehow, some way.
Yes, no, yeah, I think it needs to be recreated. I mean, as we move through these modern times and technological, advances and media, everything is mediated through screens. And I mean, I think, the worry and the real fact is that we're losing that physical, personal, in-person connection. And obviously the pandemic has amplified that for so many people who are really experiencing deep loss and grief and aren't able to share that physical space and that energetic exchange with other people. And, I think that's really hard, really, upsetting and long-term impactful, and so then to have to like relearn, how do we be in space with each other? I mean, coming out of this pandemic, hopefully in the coming months, people are going to have to like re-experience this physical sharing of space without anxiety and fear and all the things that we've been, of course, this past year have been just part of this experience of living at this time. So, yes, I think certainly in loss and grief. I do wonder that community connection, like you're saying, like what's it going to be like for people to be like, to walk next to people even. I don't want to laugh about it, but really maybe it comes down to that level, right? Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's going to be a challenge. And for some people, I think, going to take a lot of time or, it's going to be almost next to impossible because it's been such a frightening time, So I'm hopeful that this will open up kind of new ways of interacting with people and, kind of people who are feeling this. I need to connect. I need to physically be, in a meaningful conversation with somebody who is in the room, that will continue. And that, as I was mentioning to you before we started talking for the podcast, the Grief Pen Pal network that I created, of course you're not physically in the same room with someone, but the idea of actually like handwriting a letter, having it go through the mail and having this material, evidence of connection show up in your mailbox or under your door or what have you, hopefully is like a tiny little way that people who are going through grief, which is already isolating, can feel like, oh, there's someone who's listening. There's someone who's responding. And so, I'm hopeful.
How
hopeful
amazing.
for that.
Yeah, hopeful is good. Well, I'd love to share. We're coming up to the end now, and I want to share how those can reach out to you for these amazing online courses and workshops, and even you do one-on-one. And what is your website, maybe even your Instagram, or what's the best way to contact you?
Yeah, so our website is invitingabundance.net, inviting abundance, all one word. And we are active on Instagram. We also have a Facebook page, both of which are Inviting Abundance. But I'd say Instagram, we've just kind of, connected to more people and have kind of a more vibrant community of grief workers and healers and teachers, and that's been a really exciting place for us. So I would say definitely start there. And we have projects that kind of are ongoing, like the Grief Pen Pal Network. We have this one-on-one kind of grief mentorship where we basically kind of create like, what's a grief curriculum for you? Like what would be helpful? What kind of activities or readings for people who, maybe they've gone to see a grief, counselor, or they've been in a grief support group, but they're really looking for something to do, again, that making part of it. They want to make something of this experience. So they have tended to find us. And then we have upcoming this will be our third online grief workshop, exploring grief through different creative modalities. So writing and language, visual, kind of drawing, mapping, embodied movements, and designing rituals. And we have that next workshop coming up in May. So it's a 4-week workshop, and we send prompts for you to work on activities during the week, and then we come together for a couple of hours and kind of process and do additional work. And so that's been really exciting because we've had people from across the U.S. and Ireland and England, and, people are finding us from different places. So it's also really great to learn and listen to others in different areas. So we have a lot of kind of ongoing projects, and my husband Will is also a Reiki teacher, and so he does Reiki classes for those interested in energy work. And, we have a number of different kind of intersecting projects and offerings, and we love to connect with people. So, if they're like, oh, I'm really interested in this, or here's an idea for a workshop, or, we're always open to, trying to tune into what would be really helpful in terms of supporting, again, people who are actually, individually going through grief, but also those therapists and counselors and death doulas and others who support the people who are going through loss. So anytime we can make a connection, we're really pleased about it.
Oh, this is wonderful. Jen, it's so great to have you here on the podcast and here. I feel like we could have to have you on again because I feel like there's so much to talk about. we just touched the tiny little piece, the little tiny part of this kind of grief awareness, this journey. And thank you so much for being here.
Oh, absolutely. No, I agree. We've scratched the surface, and I feel like there are a number of different directions we could kind of circle back to and go into deeper. So, no, I'm so happy to talk to you. I'm so happy to, through this, have an opportunity to talk to your followers and friends and clients and colleagues. And, this has been really, really lovely conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining episode 110, Your Grief is Your Poetic Muse, that needs expression, creative energy, awareness, and most of all, love. If you like my podcast, please subscribe, leave reviews. And here we go.
This is Spirit Baby Radio. Thank you for joining Kelly in the energy of awareness, love, healing, and soul communication. Please join the next episode at www.soulbabycommunication.com.